So now I am recording. Hello. Welcome back. Alright. So, exciting news. Hold on just 1 second. So we are nearing the end of our journey on this book, but do not fear, because because next week I am going to get the second book, which I'm very excited about. That continues on from where this book leaves off, where I'm just like, I'm so glad I didn't read this book last year, like when it first came out, and had to, wait for the other book to come. So, I'm really glad about that. I wonder how long, actually, let me see. How long is the other book? How long is the Shadow of Kyoshi? Huh? Hold on. Okay. All right. So it's 368 pages, the next book, which is not so bad. It'll probably take me the same amount of sessions to read it. All right. But yes, I'm pretty sure I'm gonna be done with this book. Probably like 3 more sessions, maybe 4, which is pretty much a lot. But right now I'm on page 344, and there's only oh yeah, and there's only 100 more pages, or 99 pages more of this. No, 98. more pages of this. Okay, so now let me see where I'm gonna read till. Okay, so I'll read maybe one chapter. Because they're both pretty long chapters, so I'll either read one chapter or two chapters. Because they are pretty long. Okay. Okay. Sorry, I'm getting like super distracted. Alright. So. There we go. Much better. Alright. So now we're on to the next chapter. And the next chapter is called The Raid. Ooh, buddy. And this is a fairly long one. It's like 20 pages. Anyway. Yes, The Raid. They crept to the staging point. A small promontory. Pretty sure I said it right, but I just want to make sure. So I haven't read promontory. There we go. Yeah, I said it right. Yeah. They crept to the staging point, a small promontory a few hundred feet from the walls of the palace. They huddled around Rangi and watched the tiny incense die out in her fingers, the last embers lighting their painted faces. The last embers lighting their painted faces. Kyoshi glanced at the group, their features muted or exaggerated by strokes of red on white. Even Rangi and Lao Gu had donned the colors. The markings tied them together. The incense crumbled to where Rangi could no longer hold it. Go, she whispered. Lek stepped to the top of the boulder they were hiding behind. He grabbed his sleeve and pulled it up. He grabbed his sleeve and pulled it up over his shoulder, exposing a long, weary arm wrapped in more thin leather straps than Kyoshi had previously thought. He shook his elbow forward, and the bindings revealed the pocket of a sling. Rangi Rengi, Karima, and Wong took off running to the for the palace. Without slow, without slowing his motion, Lek kicked. Without slowing his motion, Lek kicked a stone bullet the size of a fist into the air and snatched it up. In the sling pocket. The projectile whined. The projectile whined. The projectile whined with speed as it whirled around his head, accelerated with bending. As he stood astride the rocks, legs bracing against the powerful momentum of the bullet, his face tranquil with concentration. He looked much older to Kyoshi, less a boy and more a young man in his element. He let the stone fly. Kyoshi could barely see the guard on the roof he was aiming at, and would have guessed that such a target was too impractical to hit. But Lek's talents, physical or bending or both, created a tiny plink sound off in the distance. The blurry shape that was the guard dropped out of view. Lek was already winding up his next shot before the first one landed. Rengi and others closed the gap. They were within spotting distance of the guards. He loosed the second stone. But right as he let it go from the sling end, a horn blasted through the silence of the night. It came from the south. The Daofei forces had decided to announce their presence. The sudden noise fouled. Let me drink some water. The sudden noise fouled Lek's throat. He swore and immediately threw his hands out in a bending stance. Kyoshi watched in disbelief as he applied some kind of invisible pressure to the flying stone. She couldn't see any of the results, but from the way he let out a relieved breath, when another plank went off, the shot landed. It had happened in an instant. His distance control had to be on par with Yoon's, maybe better. Go! Lek shouted at Kyoshi, not interested in her admiration. Mach and those idiots have blown our cover. Go! Kyoshi and Laogu started carrying out their portion of the plan. They sprinted down the hillside toward the southern fields of the palace. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw 3 figures, climbing into the air to vault atop the eastern wall, one of them with twinkling feet as if she were stepping on starlight. The plain across from the main gate filled with swordsmen charging at the complex. As Rengi had predicted, the front ranks were nothing but fodder for Tez Unseen. Sorry, I keep on thinking that's the end of the sentence, but it's not the end of the sentence. As Rengi had predicted, the front ranks were nothing but fodder for Tez Unseen Earthbenders, who lacked Lek's accuracy but didn't need it. The first stones arced through the air from the direction of the palace, pulverizing the unprotected Kangshen acolytes. The missiles bounced farther, carving swaths through the Daofei behind them. Screams of pain and anger filled the air. The outlaws ignored their casualties and picked up speed. Kyoshi and Laogu were headed right for the killing ground, between them and the palace. Laogu got behind Kyoshi and tapped her twice on the shoulder. Go! He shouted. She took a deep breath, still on the run, and embraced the earth fully. We can't let Mach anywhere near the palace, Kyoshi said. He'll kill everyone inside. Rangi and Karima looked up at her from their positions on the overlook. They needed a break from surveying the complex anyway. There's no way we can prevent him from taking it in the long run, Rangi said. Do you want to flip to Tez's side and try to fight them off? Kyoshi shook her head. I don't think slaughtering Mach's forces is the answer. But if Mach doesn't launch his assault, then our team will be sitting turtle ducks, Karima said. You're telling us we need to think of a way to attack the palace with an army, save the lives of everyone inside the palace, keep the army from killing itself, and rescue a prisoner from inside the walls? Laogu never said that she wasn't allowed to keep. Yeah, Laogu never said that she wasn't allowed to seek help in answering his riddles. It was the time-honored Earth Kingdom tradition. Cheating on a test with the help of your friends. That's exactly what I'm telling you. We can't make all sorts of fancy plans when we only have a handful of airbenders. We can't make all sorts of fancy plans when we only have a handful of benders, Rangi said. Kyoshi grimaced. She had to get used to exercising her prerogative, and she might as well start now. What kind of plans would you make if you had the Avatar? She asked. Kyoshi ran into the ground, descending on a 50-foot wide ramp of her own making. The earth yawned to accept her, parting ways to create a titanic furrow that Hold on. Yeah, Kyoshi ran into the ground, descending on a 50-foot wide ramp of her own making. The earth yawned to accept her, parting ways to create a titanic furrow that piled the spare dirt to the left and right. Aoma and Suzu could jump off a pier. Kyoshi had grown up in Yokuya just as much as they had. She did know about farming matters, and now she was plowing the ground with more force than the entirety of the village's earthbenders. Arrows and stones passed harmlessly overhead. She leveled out when she hit a depth of 50 feet. Why not keep things square and tidy? And kept running across the southern field with Laogu keeping pace, creating an impassable trench behind her. It had become clear during their surveillance that Tez's palace had a critical security weakness. It lacked a moat. Kyoshi was providing one for him, free of charge. Would you be able to handle going faster? Would you be able to handle going faster? Laogu shouted above the bone-crushing noise. She nodded. There was no fatigue, no strain. Her bending had changed. To cut loose like this with her full power, instead of trying to squeeze it through tiny holes, was energizing. It was the difference between eating a bowl of rice, one grain at a time, versus taking huge, satisfying bites. Laogu bent a section of the ground around them, and suddenly the two of them were surfing on a platform of earth, while Kyoshi kept shoving the soil out of the way. No sense in traveling by foot when we don't have to, he said. In this manner, it took them no time at all to round the corner of Tez's palace and encapsulate in the trench. She couldn't see above ground, But she'd imagined, but she, but she imagined surprise on the faces of the guards and the Dao Fei. Sheer murder on Mox and Wise. She had to hope that Phase 2 of the plan would appease them. The Flying Opera Company still had a promise to fulfill. Watch out now, Lao Gu said. I know you can't death step yet. He raised his hands and the platform rose out of the trench. It soared past ground level and onto the eastern roof of the palace, where it crumbled underneath their feet, leaving them standing. Hold on. He raised his hands and the platform rose out of the trench. It soared past ground level and onto the eastern roof of the palace, where it crumbled underneath her feet, leaving them standing on the shingles in the exact spot where Karima, Wong, and Regu leaving them standing on the shingles in the exact spot where Karima, Wong, and Rangi waited for them, bathed in the moonlight. Right on time, Karima said. Are the guards crowded in the southern wall? Kyoshi asked. She created a standoff between them and the Dao Fei, and she needed them staying in place. Enough of them, Rangi said. You have to move quickly, though. And let me say that again. Enough of them, Rangi said. You have to move quickly, though. This rally point left them temporarily exposed, but it had been chosen for a reason. It lay right above the over-deep turtle. It lay right above the over-large, over-deep turtle duck pond, and they had clear sight of the glowing full moon ahead. And he had clear sight of the glowing full moon above. Kyoshi drank its light, feeling its push and pull as Karima had taught her muscles loosening from the rigidity of earthbending into the relaxed, flowing state of water. She took a stance and beckoned at the pond. She knew little of advanced waterbending forms, but that wasn't necessary right now. Nor did she require her fans yet. For this feat, Kyoshi would provide the power, like a draft beast, and Karima would apply control. As waterbenders, the two of them would be greatly enhanced by the full moon, like tides rising in a bay. The sleeping turtle ducks quacked awake in panic and fled as the surface of the water bulged upward. Kyoshi lifted the blob of liquid higher and higher, where it threatened to protrude too far and spill. Karima gently nudged it back into place with the skill of a surgeon. The mass of water looked like a jelly anemone. The mass of the water looked like a jelly anemone, pulsating and flowing along the current. Kyoshi felt an impact against her ribs and nearly let the water out of her grip. She looked down to see a tear in the fabric of her jacket, and a small metal point broken off in the links of the chainmail underneath. She'd taken a glancing blow from an arrow. A few guardsmen poured out of the opposite end to the courtyard. We'll cover you, Rangi said. Go! Everyone who couldn't waterbend leaped off the roof. All right, Kyoshi, Karima shouted. Drop the hammer! Kyoshi relaxed and lowered her center of gravity with such vigor that it felt like her skeleton outtraced her muscles. The heavy formation of water punched through the interior wall of the southern portion of the compound, rushing in through the breach. There was so much that it would flood every corridor from wall to wall, floor to ceiling. Little windows and vents dotting the interior walls gave them the line of sight they needed. Though, with this amount of water, it was hard not to feel the element's presence intuitively. The locations of the screams told them it was working. The guardsmen who'd been focusing on the Daofei assault concentrated in the southern fortifications were being violently scrubbed from their posts. Kyoshi and Krema swept the tidal wave from left to right, then around the corner to the west for good measure, before releasing the pressure. They wanted to knock the soldiers out, not drown them. With a synchronized pull, they burst a portion of the west wall, letting the water flow into the other courtyard. Piles of groaning and coughing bodies spilled through the gap. In the brief moment Kyoshi spent checking that the men were alive, a battle cry caught her guard off. She turned to see a lone soldier who'd entered the room from some sally port they'd overlooked, charging her with a spear, his feet clattering over the tiles. Did I say? Oh, shit, you said something. Gotta love that full moon, man. They probably had luck on their side, otherwise maybe this wouldn't have happened. It wouldn't have been possible for them. But yes, I'm gonna make sure. I feel like it just said cry and not, it's battle cry. She didn't hear anyone weeping. Yeah, let me just say that again, because I don't think I said battle cry. I think I just said cry. I don't remember saying battle. Anyways, in the brief moment Kyoshi spent checking that the men were alive, a battle cry caught her off guard. She turned to see a lone soldier who'd entered the roof from some sally port they'd overlooked, charging her with a spear, his feet clattering over the tiles. Her hands went... Her hands went for her fans, but she fumbled the draw. Right before she was impaled, she heard a familiar zipping noise. The spearman took a stone bullet to the hip and fell off the roof with a scream. The spearman took a stone bullet to the hip and fell off the roof with a scream. Kyoshi glanced back into the night. Somewhere in the distance, Lek was grinning smugly at her. "What are you doing?" Krema snapped. "Get moving!" On to the last phase, the one Kyoshi was truly dreading. Krema and Kyoshi hurried down the steps of the service tunnels. Their objective was underground. They came to a fork where Laogu was waiting for them. They need you to bounce the cell door lock, he said to Krema, mentioning down the right branch. Kyoshi and I will check the other side for any lurking guardsmen. The others had explained to Kyoshi that bouncing a lock meant shooting water into the keyhole with enough pressure to force the pins higher, releasing the locking mechanism. It was considered faster and more elegant than trying to freeze the metal to its shattering point. It was also beyond Kyoshi's waterbending skills, fans or no fans. Kyoshi bit her lip at Krema. Kyoshi bit her lip as Krema went down the tunnel. Kyoshi bit her lip as Krema went down the right tunnel without hesitation, leaving her alone with Laogu. The old man watched the waterbender depart with casual interest. He'd taken a slouching position against the wall, as if he didn't have a care in the world. Come, he said. He said to Kyoshi. Any sense of urgency gone. Any sense of urgency gone from his voice. She followed him down the hall. It was more finished than the tunnels under Gianzi's mansion, lit with glowing crystal and painted clean white. Though her headdress added to her height, she didn't have to stoop. The dizziness she sometimes felt in Laogu's presence when they were alone came back with a vengeance. Each of her footfalls seemed to carry her miles over the endless stretch of tunnel. She lost her sense of up and down. She had no idea how far they'd gone when they reached the end of the hall. At first, Kyoshi thought it was strewn with bodies, that the violence had leapfrogged them somehow. But the dozen or so people who lay on the floor or pressed themselves against the walls were alive and trembling. They weren't guards. They wore the decorative patterns of ladies in waiting, or the plain, neat robes of butlers. Beyond them was a solid iron door, barred by a thick bolt that had no visible opening mechanism. Laogu took a step forward. The entire assembly cowered and hid their faces. Your master saved himself and locked you out, he said with wicked humor. The tight corridors caused his voice to echo at the low timber, and perhaps it had always been that deep. Or perhaps it had always been that deep. You've been left to your fate. The maid nearest him sobbed. Laogu had painted his face in a twisted, horrific gesture's leer, and many people considered Kyoshi a tower of menace on her best days. She remembered the effect she had on the staff in Gianzi's mansion on that rainy day she left them, and they'd known her for years. To Ted's servants who'd heard the throes of battle outside, she and Laogu must have looked like walking incarnations of death. An acrid smell wrinkled her nose. She looked down to see the chamberlain, rocking and mumbling to himself with his eyes rolled back in dread. Yang Chen, protect me! The spirits in Yang Chen, protect me! The spirits! Laogu laughed, and the servant shrieked. Get out, he said. Today you live. The staff members scrambled past them on their hands and knees, taking the turn that would lead them to the surface of the palace. Kyoshi watched the unfortunate men and women leave. She said nothing that would relieve their fear or allow them to sleep better tonight. The lock, Laogu reminded her. The greater portion of it was on the other side of the door, as he had explained earlier. But there was a flaw in the design that left part of the thick iron bar exposed. Defeat that and they could get in. Defeat that and they could get in. She gripped the bolt with both hands. She began to glow. No, don't restart now. Not now. Later. She gripped the bolt with both hands. It began to glow beneath her firebending. She yanked back and forth rhythmically as the metal grew hotter and hotter. Between her and Laogu, they'd come up with the 3 parts needed for this to work. Sufficient heat to ruin the temper of the iron. Oscillating motions to create fatigue in the structure, weakening it. And last, sheer brute force, her specialty. With each successive tug, the metal gave way a little more, Once, once, Rangi had warned her that heating an object like this without injury took much, much more skill than preventing your own flames from singeing your skin, which was an act so instinctive to firebenders that it didn't need to be taught. This trick with the iron was prolonged, dangerous contact with a hard surface. Yeah, this trick with the iron was prolonged, dangerous contact with a hot surface. Kyoshi felt her Kyoshi felt her hands start to burn. You're almost there, Laogu said with a hint of admiration. Honestly, I wasn't completely sure this was possible. The metal. I don't know who was saying that. I think maybe she was saying that? It doesn't say. But I'm pretty sure it was Kyoshi that said that. Anyway. Oh, really? Is that the rule? Is there a rule to these things? Damn. I'm just gonna say it was Kyoshi that was saying it. Because I feel like she would have very lack of faith for her to do this. Anyway, the metal angled farther and farther off its bearings until right before the pin became too much to bear. It snapped. The severed ends of the bolt jutted out like red hot pokers. The heavy door groaned on its hinges. Kirsty wrung the heat from her fingers and shouldered the vault open. It was brighter inside than in the hallway. She blinked as she took in her surroundings. The interior of the large room was not what she expected. Laogu had described it as an emergency survival measure. She expected she expected water stores, preserved foods, weapons. It had been redecorated. Someone had removed the necessities for lasting out a siege and replaced them with luxurious carpets, silken pillows. One wall was racked with jugs of wine, not water. Any fool who locked himself inside would have died within a few days. There was a single figure standing against the far wall, a boy in his high clothes. Kyoshi made the deduction that Tez's son had coverted this that Kyoshi made the deduction that Tez's son had converted this room, made for war, into a clubhouse. Oh, where is your father? She said, the words coming out in a the words coming out a harsh growl. Where is Governor Ted? The boy stared at her with a round, soft face full of defiance. I'm Te Sihung, he said. I'm the governor. Fuck, dude. Is she gonna kill a child? Oh my god. Kyoshi looked at Laogu. He smiled at her knowingly. This was the test. He's a shit. Well, yeah, he is a shit kid because of what he's doing to his own people, but also, like, that's gonna be a hard decision to make. Yo, kill him. I wonder if Kyoshi does. Monarch is a monarch. Alright. This was the test. Whether she was cold blooded enough to help him kill a boy who didn't look old enough to shave. She cursed the old man, cursed the stupid youth in front of her, cursed the corruption and incompetence of our nation that allowed such a mistake of authority to occur. How old are you? She asked Ted. And get it over with. Well, she's still finding herself. She's still finding herself. Justice. That's right, she is a justice girl. How old are you? She asked Ted. I don't owe Dao Fei an answer, he sneered. She reached forward, grabbed him by the back of the neck, and tossed him out the door of the vault. He bounced on the floor and skidded down the hall. Kyoshi walked around to his head. Kyoshi walked around to his head and nudged his jaw with her foot. How old are you? She asked again. 15! Soon! He whimpered. His attitude had changed dramatically mid-flight, and the painful landing sealed the deal. Please don't kill me! Yep, kill him quick. He's Lek's age, Lao Gu said to Kyoshi. Old enough to know right and wrong. Old enough to shirk his responsibilities, to mismanage, to steal. You saw the state of Zigan. I can still guarantee that you'll save many lives by taking his. He noticed Ted trying to crawl away and placed his foot on the boy's ankle. Not hard enough to break it, but enough to make it clear he could. Ted gave up on trying to move. Please, he said. My father was governor before me. I just acted in accordance with what he taught me. Please. That was all anyone did in this world. What they saw their predecessors and teachers do. The Avatar was not the only being who was part of an unbroken chain. You're not much older than him. She heard, you're not much older than him, she heard Lao Gu say. Are you immune to consequence? No, she wasn't. She picked up Ted by his lapels. He blubbered incoherently, tears streaming down his face. Sorry, she said, but this is something I've decided on long before I laid eyes on you. Kyoshi thrust an arm behind her and blasted Lao Gu down the tunnel with a ball of wind. Oh my god! She betrayed Lao Gu! Ah! Yeah, Kyoshi thrust an arm behind her and blasted Lao Gu down the tunnel with a ball of wind. Rangi, I can't airbend. You're not an airbending teacher. It was the day before Kyoshi was scheduled to begin training with Krima. He was probably expecting it. I wasn't expecting it. I thought she was gonna kill the guy, the fucker. But yes. I don't know, man. I don't know. I mean, technically, Yoon was around Kyoshi's age and they're still children, and he died. Well, we're implying that he died because the spirit took him, but I'm pretty sure he got killed like a motherfucker. So that's okay. No, it's not okay. They're kids. He's only 14. He's still a teenager. You can't change my mind, Chandler. Nah. And I thought she was gonna kill that kid, but she didn't. I think she still wasn't sure that she was gonna kill him. But yes, let's continue. Okay. Rangi, I can't airbend. You're not an airbending teacher. It was the day before Kyoshi was scheduled to begin training with Krima to see if they could lift an entire pond's worth of water together. Rangi and Kyoshi were off by themselves in a small clearing under a lonely, gnarled mountain tree that had sprinkled its dried leaves over the ground. The two of them walked around in circles, their arms extended, nearly meeting in the center. There was no way they were doing this right. I'm not trying to teach you airbending, Rangi said. I only want you to create wind. I only want you to create wind once before you start waterbending in earnest. It doesn't have to be perfect. She spun around and traded the position of her hands. I think you're supposed to spiral? Feel your energy spiraling? Kyoshi had to pivot awkwardly to go the other way before Rangi collided with her. How are you okay with amateur self-taught airbending? I'm not. I just have this irrational fear that if you get too good at waterbending before ever airbending once, you'll damage the elemental cycle. I know. But she wants her to learn the elements in the order that they should be. Because, like she said, she's worried about her damaging the elemental cycle. Yeah. I just have this irrational fear that if you get too good at waterbending before ever airbending once, you'll damage the elemental cycle. Back when you used your fans to waterbend, I was ecstatic at first, but then I panicked. I started having nightmares that you permanently locked out your firebending and airbending. I was afraid you'd become a broken avatar. Rangi plunked down on the ground and put her head in her hands. I know it doesn't make any sense, she said. Nothing makes sense anymore. We're doing everything wrong. Up is down, left is right. Kyoshi knelt down and wrapped her arms around Rangi from behind. But the center doesn't change. Rangi made a little snort. I know, you know I miss him too. You know I miss him too? She murmured. Master Kelsang. He was so kind and funny. Sometimes when I find him, he was so kind and funny. Sometimes when I find myself missing him, I feel guilty that I'm not thinking about my father instead. I wish they were here. I wish they were both here. I wish everyone we've lost could be here with us one last time. Kyoshi squeezed her tight. She imagined Ranki's energy twining together in place with her own, forming a stronger thread from two strands. There was a tickle against her brow. She and Rangi looked up to see a swirling dance of leaves, spinning around in a circle. The two of them caught in its eye. Kelsang used to make her laugh. Kelsang used to make her laugh in the garden like this, by swirling the air, letting her touch the currents and feel the wind run between her fingers. Kyoshi let the breeze play against her skin before giving it a gentle push with her hand. Yeah, Kyoshi let the breeze play against her skin before giving it a gentle push with her hand. The wind spun faster at her request. She could feel Kelsang smiling warmly at her, a final gift of love. They'll always be with us, she said to Rangi. Always. Laogu landed in the vault, which happened to be full of cushions, which meant that Kyoshi had which meant that Kyoshi had less of a head start than she'd counted on. She threw Te over her shoulder and ran down the hall. Girl! She heard Laogu shout behind her, echoing through the tunnel. She had the distinct feeling he could catch up at a moment's notice, no matter how far she'd gone. The fear lent her more speed. She took the stairs 5 at a time until she reached the surface. Hold on. Tag gasped from his waist. What are you? Shut up! They were hemmed in by the walls of the courtyard. The stables were on the opposite end of the complex. An immortal assassin was surely only a few paces away behind. Kyoshi ran at the far wall. Then she ran higher and higher. The earth flicked at the soles of her feet, propelling her upward. She continued to dust step until she landed on the top of the roof. She spared a glance back. Laogu stood by the stairs, choosing not to follow her into the air for a moment. My, he called out. You're just full of deceptions, aren't you? To think you were faking so many failed attempts at dust stepping. They weren't all fake, Kyoshi shouted as she sped away. She sprinted across the palace, tiles crunching under her feet. She went north until she found the stables. She went north until she found the stables butting the wall. Yeah, she went north. Yeah, she went north until she found the stables abutting the wall. Dropping down to the ground with Tess still in hand, she found a sleepy ostrich horse and roused it awake. Lagu was still toying with her, or perhaps he couldn't dust step. She'd never seen him do it. Either way, they didn't. Either way, they didn't have much time. She dumped the boy astride the mount. She dumped. Jesus, who the fuck is doing that? Okay. Okay. Yeah, she'd never seen him do it. Either way, they either way they didn't have much time. She dumped the boy astride the mount she'd stolen. She dumped the boy astride the mount she'd stolen. Thank you, Tess said, wobbling from the lack of a saddle. I'll give you anything you want. Money, offices. Kyoshi backhanded him hard across the face. You should have died tonight, she hissed. I'll give you one chance to unsully yourself as governor of these lands. You will open the doors of your storehouses and make sure your people are fed. You will give back what you stole, even if it means selling your family's possessions. If you don't by the time I return, I'll make you wish you'd been captured by those Dao Fei out there. She had left an open end on that timeline, having no idea when she'd be free to make good on the threat. But she knew she would, given the chance. She was letting Ted know there would be consequences. Jianzu would be proud, she thought darkly. Ted's bleeding face roiled with confusion. You earthbent and airbent. I saw it. How is that possible unless you can't be? You're the Avatar? She saw the images wearing in his head. He must have known Yoon, maybe met him in person. Revealing her identity had always been a risk on this mission. But Ted was a loose end, one that ran in the same circles as Jianzu. Kyoshi bit her lip. She'd chosen from the start to save this boy's miserable life, instead of keeping the secret that her own safety depended on. No sense in regretting that. No sense in regretting it now. No, I think she lets him go. Nah. Oh, whatever. Yeah, Kyoshi bit her lip. She'd chosen from the start to save this boy's miserable life instead of keeping the secret that her own safety depended on. No sense in regretting it now. All the more reason for you to do as I say. She slapped the ostrich horse's flank and sending it careening toward the ditch. Tess screamed as she bent a bridge into place at the last minute. He rode off into the darkness, clinging to the neck of his mount for dear life. Once he was gone, Kyoshi lowered the bridge again. She didn't want Mock's men infiltrating the compound from the rear, while so many helpless people were still inside. She dust stepped over the gap and took her time walking farther north, to the rendezvous point where the others would be waiting. At some point during the hike, Lao Gu fell in beside her. You're not a very good apprentice, he said tonelessly. There were a dozen replies she could have given him. Tai was too young to die and still had time to redeem himself. The whole exercise was flawed and had nothing to do with her desire to end Jiansu. I haven't failed to take my man. I haven't failed to take my man in a long time, Lao Gu went on. My pride is in shambles. Kyoshi winced. She never seen Lao Gu truly angry, and it was a gamble as to what kind of person would emerge when things didn't go his way. "'Tis your responsibility now," he said. "From this point onward, his crimes will be your crimes. More than anything, I'm upset that you've fretted. I'm upset that you've fettered yourself in such a way. It's like you haven't paid attention to my lessons." She's supposed being treated like a disobedient child adopted a who'd adopted a stray cat was the best result she could have hoped for. "I'm sorry, Sifu," Kyoshi said. "I'm willing to accept the results of my actions." "Easy for you to say that now." Lao Gu's upper lip curled with disdain. "Mercy has a higher price than most people think." She stayed silent. There was no need to further provoke a man who could lightly start. Yeah, there was no need to further provoke. Hold on, I need to readjust myself. Yeah, there was no need to further provoke a man who could likely start the Avatar. Who could likely. Let me drink water. There we go. She stayed silent. There was no need to further provoke a man who could likely start the Avatar cycle anew in the Fire Nation right now without breaking stride. Any hope she'd had that sparing Te was the true goal all along, or that Lao Gu, through the lens of age, would interrupt her portrayal as one grand joke in the greater scheme of life, was stifled by his compressed, tangible annoyance with her. There was no deeper level. There was no deeper level understanding to be had. The standoff between them continued until they reached the others. What do you mean? I don't get what you're saying. Ah, I see. Yeah. I don't know. I blinked. But yes. Yeah, maybe it was testing her to test her. It was like a meta test. Yeah. Yeah. Meta test. All right. Yeah. There was no deeper level understanding to be had. The standoff between them continued until they reached the others. The Flying Opera Company was flush with success. Wong and Karima had held a bound man between them, clothed in a plain rag tunic. He had the sweet potato sack tied above. He had the sweet potato sack tied over his head. "We did it!" Rangi said. She ran forward and embraced Kyoshi. "I can't believe we did it. You bent like an..." She stopped herself from saying Avatar in the presence of a stranger. "Like a master of old. Let's go make our let's go more let's go let's go make our delivery. Let's go make our delivery," Wong said. He picked up the prisoner and threw him over his shoulders, much as Kyoshi had done with Te. "Sorry for the rough treatment, brother. It won't be too long before you're breathing free air." "It's no problem at all," the hooded man said politely. The Daofei nearly filled them with arrows as they approached the southern camp. "We have your man!" Karima shouted. Wong dumped the prisoner to his feet. With the hood on, he couldn't see how his rescuers crowded behind him like a human shield. Mock strode up to them, apoplectic. "What do you think you were doing? We discussed no such plan." Karima held her hands up. "We got him out of prison," she said, reminding him again that the mission had technically been accomplished. The trench was a necessary last-minute improvisation. That wasn't true. Figuring out how to keep the Daofei out of Palace had been the primary challenge Kyoshi had set to Rangi and Karima. Seeing the waterbender lie for her made Kyoshi feel worse about hiding the additional side mission with Lao Gu and Te from the others. She caused her friends undue risk. "I should flay your skins and put them under my saddle," Mock screamed. Wise stood behind them, though Kyoshi noticed he wasn't so ready to draw a blade this time. The men stared at her warily, rubbing his bandaged hand. "Mock, is that you?" the prisoner said, tilting his ear toward the noise. "If so, stop haranguing my saviors and get this bag off my head." Wong untied his hood while Karima sliced the ropes off his wrists with a small blade of water. Rangi had recommended the bindings as a precaution since they didn't want to confuse captive resisting his own rescuers. The burlap sack fell off his head to reveal a pale, handsome face under shaggy dark hair. "Big brother," Mock said. The Daofei's leader's mannerisms suddenly took on a reverential, submissive quality. "I can't believe it's you, after so long." Come here," the prisoner said, opening his arms wide. The two men embraced and pounded each other's backs. 8 years, the newly freed man said. 8 years. "I know, brother," Mock sighed. 8 years, the man repeated, squeezing harder. 8 years. It took you 8 sticking years to rescue me. It took you 8... Yeah, It took you 8 stinking years to rescue me? Mock gasped, unable to breathe. I'm sorry, brother. He choked out the air he had left. We tried our best. Your best? His elder brother screamed in his ear. Your best nearly took a decade. What's your second best? Waiting for my prison to collapse from rust? Judging by Mock's squeals of pain, prison hadn't rendered a man physically weak. Prison hadn't rendered the man physically weak. He tossed Mock aside and surveyed the Dafe. Why hadn't made a single move? The surviving Kang Shen followers took a knee and lowered their heads, while the rank and file stood at attention. Kyoshi's eyes fell on the moon peach blossoms, still placed with care on the men's shirts. While it was now obvious that they'd sprung no ordinary outlaw from Tez's custody, there was something worse hanging in the air. A dark warning in her imagination. Uncles, Kyoshi spoke up suddenly. If the debt of the Flying Opera Company is repaid, we should be on our way. Her instincts screamed that they needed to get out of here immediately. Repaid? The man they rescued said. He beamed at them, not with the fake smiles of mock, but with genuine warmth in his heart. My friends, you have done more than repay a debt. You have made a possible future. You have made a new future possible. Forevermore, you shall have the friendship and sworn brotherhood of Shu Ping An, and you must stay and celebrate with us. Alarms went off in Kyoshi's head, the creeping hint of recognition just out of her sight. Before she and the others could decline, he turned to address his troops. Mock's men had become his men, and there was no protest. Brothers, he said, his pleasant voice ringing through the camp. For many years you've kept the faith. You are true followers of the code. I would die happily this very instant, knowing that there is still honor and loyalty in this world. The assembled Daofe roared and shook their weapons. The sun began to rise dramatically behind Shu, as if few were favored by the spirits themselves. But I think we've suffered enough losses, don't you? Shu said. 5,000. 5,000 of our compatriots snuffed out like vermin. I haven't forgotten them. Not over the 8 years I spent rotting in an abider prison. I haven't forgotten them. Have you? Over the frenzied screams of the Daofe, Zhu raised his arms to greet the morning light. I say there's a price to be paid. A debt that is owed. And the collection starts today. Kyoshi's head swam. They'd been duped, distracted by small matters when the real danger that threatened the kingdom loomed within reach. She was so stupid. Now, Zhu said with a theatrical casualness. Where are my colors? I feel terribly naked without them. Mock hurried over and handed him a piece of fabric. In unison, the Daofe reached into pockets and satchels or lifted their shirts to reveal lengths of cloth tied around their waists. They freed the wrappings from wherever they'd hid him and fastened them around their necks. Hold on. Okay. The sun rose fully, letting Kyoshi see the hues that adorn the bodies of every outlaw present. The moon peach blossoms had been a ruse, a cover story to avoid detection. The autumn bloom the autumn bloom was a temporary name for an old organization. A behemoth had risen from the depths of the earth to feed once more. Much better, Shu said as he patted the bright yellow scarf knotted around his neck. The yellow necks. It's the yellow necks. Yep, much better, Shu said as he patted the bright yellow scarf knotted around his neck. I was getting a bit chilly there. And that is the end of that chapter. I will read the next chapter because I still have another hour to do so before I want to stop. And this one is slightly shorter. Sort of. Yeah, it's slightly shorter. Okay, so the next chapter is called... The next chapter is called The Challenge. We have to do something, Rangi said. This is our fault. It might be our fault, but it's definitely not our problem, Karima muttered as she hastily packed her portion of the camp. It's not our problem. She repeated it like a mantra that might keep them safe from harm. I don't understand, Lex said. Who is this Zhu Ping An guy? Who are the Yellownecks? I thought we were dealing with the Autumn Bloom. The Yellownecks are a business that we don't want any part of, Wong said. He rolled up the sleeping blankets with tight, nervous hand motions. They're not in this life for money or freedom. They take glee in pillage and destruction. They're wanton killers, and Zhu Ping An is their brains, heart, and soul. He was a bloodthirsty madman before he spent the last 8 years locked up and dreaming about revenge, Karima said. We heard stories. He used to call himself the General of Pandamu and claimed its residents were beholden to him for the protection he provided. Lex scratched his head. Where's Pandamu? Nowhere, Karima said. It's the name of the world he made up himself. My point is, he's unhinged. Earlier, as they mumbled excuses about needing to leave the company of the Yellownecks, Zhu had seemed easygoing without Mock's pettiness or wise outbursts of violence. He'd assured them that though he wished to throw a feast in their honor, a little show of appreciation, anything really, they were free to go with all debts to the Autumn Bloom and Yellownecks repaid. Kyoshi knew that veneer of civility meant nothing. Men like Zhu simply waited for the right moment to drop it and reveal the beast behind the curtain. I don't know how he's alive, Rangi said. She paced in circles around the remnants of the campfire. I've read copies of reports sent to the Earth King by Jianzu himself. Zhu was listed among the dead at the Battle of the Zulu Pass. This doesn't make sense. Karima kept her argument directed at Kyoshi. Look, they're what? A couple hundred strong now, at the most? Fewer since the King Shen decided to dine on rocks. They're not an army like they were in the past. We can simply wait until the governors summon. We can simply wait until the governors summon a militia force to deal with them. I bet Te is the one who rides. I bet Te is the one who rides out to meet him. Governor Te was currently riding at the head of a one-man column in nothing but his pajamas. It wasn't clear whether Karima and others knew how old he was, but he could be 100. But he could be 100, and he still wouldn't know how to deal with a man who'd given Jiandu fits. That sounds perfect to me, Lex said. His face was unrecognizably dark. The more dead lawmen, the better. He left the camp to get Peng Peng ready for departure, satisfied with his contribution to the debate. Zhu first started out with smaller numbers than he has now, Rangi said. If more Yellownecks come out of hiding and rally to his banner, we're back in the dark days after Karuk died. We're not going back to anything, Krama shouted. Zhu is the Abider's problem. As far as we're concerned, he's a finished job. You don't go back to a job you've already finished. Years ago, I passed through a town caught in the wake of the Yellownecks, Lagu said, reminiscing calmly like it had been a mediocre vacation he'd once taken. I saw what happened to the residents. He twisted his mouth, trying to decide what word to use before settling on one. Stacked, he said. He made a layering motion with his hands, alternating one on top of the other. Krima still wasn't swayed. We run away from trouble, she said, not toward it. That's our policy. It served us well in Chameleon Bay. It helped us survive in Hujiang, and it'll pay off here. What do you think we should do, Kyoshi? Lagu said, given your newfound taste for making decisions of life and death. His question was dripping with petulance. But the rest of the gang didn't know about the botched assassination. They were still thinking of her command to preserve the lives of Tess' household while pulling off the raid. No one had argued against her back then. It didn't seem like they would now either. The group fell silent. As they waited on Kyoshi's response, offering her a chance to tilt the scales conclusively, her head swam. A single moon ago, she was a weak link. She was the weak link, not the shot caller. The others were putting too much stock in her being the Avatar, conflating bending versatility with leadership. She had grown more capable in the days since Huxiang, but not wiser. Kyoshi felt back on the one philosophy she well versed in as an earthbender. Neutral Jing. We wait and see what happens, she said. But we can wait from a higher elevation. Load up Peng Peng. Rangi and Krima, the two opposite voices in her ear, united to share a worried look with each other. They loitered in the air, a physical stamp of Kyoshi's indecision on the blue and white cloth of the sky. Peng Peng floated inside a cloud. Peng Peng floated inside a cloud that Krima had pulled around them. Their waterbender stood upright in the saddle, twirling her arms to prevent the tufts of vapor from parting and revealing their position. Lek Lek took them slowly over to the Lek took them slowly over the Yellow Necks so they could monitor the movements of Zhu's forces. Kyoshi was keenly aware that they occupied a literal halfway point between fleeing and staying, perhaps, perhaps ruining their chances for either option. She took the nag she took the nagging doubt out of her head and peered down below. The column of men drifted slowly away from Tess Palace like ants on the march. They formed a mass. They formed a solid mass. Zhu was no doubt at the front, with the occasional scout sprinting ahead and returning back to report. A colony sending out feelers. I hope they're heading toward a militia outpost, Lex said, still clinging to some ember of hate for the law. Then we could see a good dust stuff up there. Then we could see a good dust up from here. They've stopped by a rice field. Rangi said. Maybe they're trying to pick it? The second harvest wouldn't be ready. Though. The farming knowledge of Yokia had rubbed off on her. Kyoshi watched as the crops provoked some kind of response in the Daofei. Years ago, when she was still living without a roof over her head, she would sometimes watch her fellow insects crawl through the dirt in search of food. The motions of bugs always started slow, indistinguishable. The motions of the bugs always started slow, indistinguishable from randomness, full of hesitant backpedaling. Until within the span of a finger snap, they returned into. Until within the snap of a finger. Oh, let me say that again. Sorry, just needed to get water. Alright. The motions of the bugs always started slow, indistinguishable from randomness, full of hesitant backpedaling, until within the span of a finger snap, they turned into a focused swarm. The army lingered next to the burgeoning grain, as if the collective had sniffed a target of interest. Dark lines began to grow across the field. She puzzled over their meaning until she realized it was Zhu's scouts infiltrating through the high stalks of rice, parting and trampling the plants. Her eyes started to the opposite end of the field, where a small house and barn stood. Smoke from the morning's water boils puffed gently out the chimney. Kyoshi had been so preoccupied with the safety of the household staff of the palace that she had forgotten about the people outside the moat. Large estates often had tenant farmers managing their private lands. In that little house was a family, a target for 8 years of Zhu's pent-up wrath. Trying to split the difference between neutral Jing had been the wrong choice. I made a mistake, Kyoshi said. We have to get down there. Now. Karima made a choking, indignant noise. What exactly are we going to do? The lions had nearly crossed the rice field. I don't know, Kyoshi said. But I can't stay here and watch anymore. Drop me off and fly away if you have to. A scream came from the house. The occupants had spotted the Dao Fei closing in on them. The memory of swordsmen wearing yellow around their necks likely still haunted this region of the Earth Kingdom. Karima swore and smashed her fist against the saddle floor. No. I'm gonna push it somewhere else. Nah, he's not Conqueror Chin. He's not Chin the Conqueror. He's someone else. That doesn't happen till later. She'll get that. Yeah, she will. Sorry. Hold on just 1 second. Sorry. Just waiting for something. Okay. Um. Oh. All right. Let me just go back a little bit. Okay. The lines had nearly crossed the rice field. I don't know, Kyoshi said, but I can't stay up here and watch anymore. Drop me off and fly away if you have to. A scream came from the house. The occupants had spotted the Dao Fei closing in on them. The memory of those swordsmen wearing the yellow around their necks likely still haunted this region of the Earth Kingdom. Karima swore and smashed her fist against the saddle floor. No, she said. If you go, we go. She flicked the cap of her water skin open and pulled the cloud vapor inside, condensing it into ammunition. Once we hit the ground, we'll follow your lead, Wong said to Kyoshi. Lek groaned but brought Ping Ping around in a tight turn, descending as fast as it was safe to. The others gripped the edges of the saddle and hung on for dear life. Thank you. Thank you, Rangi said to Karima, the wind whipping her words, forcing her to shout. It was the nicest thing she'd ever said. It was the nicest thing she'd ever been to the waterbender. You're true companions of the Avatar. What good is it if we're dead? Yeah, what good is that if we're dead? Karima yelled back, though she blushed just a bit. Please don't be too late. Please don't let us be too late, Kyoshi prayed that as they sprinted toward the barn. She'd chosen that building over the house, remembering the setup in Hujiang. The tiny hut wouldn't have fit a big enough audience for Zhu and Mock's grandstanding tastes. The contingent of Dao Fei stuck outside the doors. The contingent of Dao Fei stuck outside the doors, sprang to their feet in alarm, but relaxed as they drew closer. The paint still caked on their faces made the flying opera company instantly recognizable. The ghosts in red and white were honored guests of their boss, but Kyoshi pushed deeper inside. She could see over the heads of the crowd into an empty space in the back where Shu probably was, and shoved her way through until she found him. Excuse me. The leader of the Yellownecks sat on a bench, calmly reading a book. He must have missed literature in prison and taken it from the house. Against the wall behind him, Mock and Y stood guard over a woman and her son, who couldn't have been older than 7 or 8, cowering and sobbing to themselves, dressed in simple farmer's garb. They had been beaten, their faces bruised and bloodied. Bruised and bloodied. Her anger at Zhu laying hands on the child paled before the sight of what he'd done to the boy's father. The Dao Fei had tied the tenant farmer up and hung him by the wrists over the rafters with a long rope. Several men holding onto the other end so they could raise him and lower him at Zhu's command. Underneath, they'd set up a fire and a rendering cauldron full of boiling water. It was big enough that if they dropped him, he'd be fully submerged in the vessel. The farmer's big toes dangled in the liquid, and he screamed through his gag. Kyoshi ran up and kicked the heavy cauldron out. Kyoshi ran up and kicked the heavy cauldron over, spilling water in the direction of the Dao Fei holding the rope. They'd let go, and she caught the farmer in her arms. She heard the hiss of the blades being drawn as she laid the man on the ground dry, twitching in pain but still alive. Shu didn't look up from his book. "You spilled my tea," he said. He licked his finger and turned another page. She had come to the conclusion that Mock's affected nonchalance was a pale imitation of his elder brother's. Zhu had probably learned it from someone else. Like Te, they were all copying their predecessors in a cycle that went on and on. Kyoshi drew strength from the fact that her own links went back further, among the most righteous in history. "Zhu!" she shouted. "Stop this! Let them go!" She heard shuffling behind her and a familiar, reassuring warmth. Ranky and the Flying Opera Company stood at her side. It is pretty menacing and cool. Yeah, I'm just like, ooh, he's that kind of a bad guy. I like him. "Zhu! Zhu!" she shouted. "Stop this! Let them go!" She heard the shuffling behind her and a familiar, reassuring warmth. Ranky and the Flying Opera Company stood at her side. Zhu clapped his book shut and stared at Kyoshi. He'd combed his long hair and cropped his beard as best he could. "First off, it's Uncle Zhu to you," he said. "And second, this man is an abider. He worked for those who imprisoned me. He grew their grain and took their coin, which makes him another weight on the scales I must balance. If you can't handle this, you're not gonna like what's going. If you can't handle this, you're not gonna like what I do to the town of Zigon." Kyoshi's fist tightened, as if they were playing roles, then she would imitate the strongest, the bravest, the best. "You don't get Zigon," she snarled. "You don't get any town in the Earth Kingdom, nor this farmhouse for that matter. You get the free air you can fit in your lungs and nothing else." She heard her friends tense up beside her. Shu preemptively waved off the Dao Fei who were ready to hack her to bits. "Kyoshi, was it?" he said. "Justice!" "I wonder if she kills him, though." 50% chance she might. "Kyoshi, was it?" he said. "Kyoshi, I'm eternally grateful to you and your compatriots for rescuing me. But you're young, and that's why you don't understand. 8 years of my life were stolen from me. Thousands of my followers. I wonder too." "Yeah. Kyoshi, I'm eternally grateful to you and your compatriots for rescuing me. But you're young, and that's why you don't understand. 8 years of my life were stolen from me. Thousands of my followers. At your tender age, what would you know about what about at your tender age, what would you know about that kind of injustice?" "They're all the same," Kyoshi thought. "Every single one." Whether they clothe themselves in business or brotherhood or a higher calling, only they can see. Yeah, whether they clothe themselves in business or brotherhood or a higher calling, only they can see. It doesn't matter. They're one and the same. A lesser man might quit in the face of a setback that large, Zhu said, but not me. I relish the work, not the reward. I will get what I am owed. They look at themselves like forces of nature, as inevitable ends, but they're not. Their death is as false as the shoals at low tide. They twist the meaning of justice to absolve themselves of conscience. Jew smiled benevolently and tried to find a spot in the book again. The world is on the verge of forgetting my name, which means I didn't carve the scars deep enough last time. I'll do better with the second chance you've given me, Kyoshi. He motioned at Wei, who still hovered over the mother and son. Why shove the mother onto her hands and knees and yanked her head back by her hair, exposing her throat. She screamed. They're humans like us, made of skin and guts and pain. They need to be reminded of that fact. I said stop! Kyoshi shouted. There was a backing to her voice that punched through the air. Why hesitated, remembering the last time he'd drawn his knife in her presence. Kyoshi pointed at Zhu. Zhu Ping An, I challenge you to face me on the Lei Tai immediately. It was the one idea that could have forestalled both him and his army from exploding into a frenzy of violence. Maybe Zhu didn't think much of Kyoshi. Yeah, maybe Zhu didn't think much of Kyoshi, but he had to respect the challenge. The code that empowered him in the eyes of his followers demanded it. There was a silence from the crowd as her words sunk in, but Zhu responded as if it were the most normal request in the world. Challenges are meant to settle grievances, he said, dabbing the pad of his forefinger with his tongue again. What insult have I given you? Your existence? Kyoshi spat. She didn't know it was possible for a group of hard killers to gasp collectively. Now Zhu had paid her mind. He put the book down. Word. Yeah, man. That's the equivalent to saying, what's that meme? It's like a show on Cartoon Network meme. What is it? It's something like, you have the nerve of being alive, or something like that. I bet you can pull it up real quick. Where they're like at a bar or something, and the person says, you have a lot of nerve coming here. And the other person is just like, you have a lot of nerve being alive. I think this is the same energy. Yes, this one. That's the same equivalent to just what just happened just now. Yeah. Great Kyoshi moment right there. Now Zhu paid her mind. He put the book down and stood up. Yeah, he put the book down and stood up. His men parted to form an aisle between him and the barn door. Only Kyoshi and the flying opera company stood in the middle, barring the way. Bending or without? Ju asked, perfectly at ease. Bending, Kyoshi said. It was the only way she'd stand a chance. She remembered her fans in her belt. Weapons. Anything goes. Weapons. Anything goes. She felt the flare of and turmoil of Rangi's emotions beside her, but heard no protest. Very well, then. The prospect of a duel registered on Ju was as much as a fly landing on his nose. Perhaps he'd already assessed her abilities, and that was the amount of threat she represented. Let's get this over with. It was a lopsided arrangement. Six on one side of the rice field, hundreds on the other. In the middle, the team of Yellownecks used shovels from the barn to pile dirt into the raised platform. With an earth-bending lay tie, the fighting surface had be. With an earth-bending lay tie, this fighting surface had to be shaped from an element not made of wood, like the one in Fujian. Kyoshi had declined to assist with construction in the hope that stalling would create more time for a governor's militia, an Earth Kingdom army, for any help at all to arrive. At this point, she'd take 10 and a couple of angry servants armed with brooms. This was your plan? Karima Watt said as they watched the dirt flinging into the air. It wasn't a plan so much as a thing that could have happened and did, she said. I noticed none of you tried to stop me. There's little we can do, Wong said, especially if you want to stop him from razing Sigon to the ground. It's right next door, and the nearest Earth Kingdom army outpost is a 5 days march away. Yeah, it's right next door, and the nearest Earth Kingdom army outpost is a 5 days march away. Kyoshi stepped behind Rangi and embraced her, feeling her warmth. None of the others commented on their closeness. I'm sorry I keep doing this to you, she muttered, her lips so close to the firebender's ear. Rangi leaned back into her. Today you get a pass. As the Avatar, you would have tangled with horrors. Horrors like Zhu on a regular basis. This might be the first time you've done your duty since we left Yokia. It felt good to get a decision right, though it was uncertain how long she'd live to enjoy it. A long fucking time, apparently. Kyoshi, can I speak to you for a moment? Lao Gu said. In private? The others frowned, slightly confused. As far as they knew, there was no particular relationship between Kyoshi and the old man that warranted a conversation prior to her imminent death. Lao Gu was more likely to give her a few shots of wine for courage than a pep talk. Kyoshi followed him behind the curtain of rice stalks. What do you think you were doing? He snapped once they were alone. He'd never taken such a tone with her, not even after she'd saved Tez's life. You think it's wrong to fight Zhu? She said. If Lao Gu was going to argue that the Yellownecks were good for the health of the Earth Kingdom, then he was truly as loopy as his outward persona. No, you fool! What I mean is that if you wanted Zhu dead, you should have struck him down without notice, blindsided him. That is the way of the predator. He seemed positively disgusted at the notion of an honorable duel. Facing him on the late high and hoping for the best is the mentality of an herbivore braying and shaking its antlers to look for good in front of the rest of the herd. Why are you fighting someone you could assassinate? Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Facing him on the late high and hoping for the best is the mentality of an herbivore braying and shaking its antlers to look good in front of the rest of the herd, he said. I wanted you to drink blood. I wanted you to drink blood, not chew grass. Kyoshi took a step back. She bowed deeply before him, fully and formally, holding her angle at length. It wasn't the different it wasn't the deference of a student to a teacher, but rather the rarely used apology bow. Only trotted out in the Earth Kingdom in moments of true sincerity, and she kept it going until she heard a snort of surprise from Lao Gu. I'm sorry, Sifu, she said, but I'm not doing this as a killer. I'm doing this as the Avatar, even if the world won't know it. Lao Gu sighed. Stop that. You're embarrassing both of us. She straightened to see his wrinkled face arranged into an expression of scorn. It was ruined by it was ruined only by the genuine concern in his eyes. Figures that the one time I find a pupil I like, she tries to be as mortal as possible, he groused. Well, maybe Zhu might suddenly pass away where he stands in the next 5 minutes, Kyoshi said to any spirit or legendary creature of death nearby that might overhear and take pity on her. Death doesn't work like that, Lao Gu said. He reached up and patted her on the shoulder. You're on your own. The Dao Fei finished stamping the platform flat. It was smaller than the one in Hujiang. There would be less room to run. Zhu hopped onto the lei tai first, swinging his arms to loosen his shoulders. He changed into a vest and a pair of planks. He changed into a vest and a pair of pants cinched at the ankles. Monk and Wise stood in his corner, the elevation of the platform hiding them from the chest down. If anything happens, take Peng Pen and get out of here, Kyoshi said in an Kyoshi said in an ironic echo of what Rangi had once told her. Find someone with the power to intervene before the Yellownecks grow in their numbers again. But what if it's the Gravedigger? Krema asked. Kyoshi paused. She wondered if her hatred would follow her into the afterlife. Whether the purity of her vengeance was so important that she turned away his help in saving lives. She didn't answer the question. Instead, she gave Rangi one last squeeze and hopped into the platform. She was still geared from last night's battle. The facepaint had started to flake off. Kyoshi studied her trembling fingers against the handles of her fans. The stage-like nature of the lei tai added the tension Yeah, the stage-like nature of the lei tai added the tension of a performance, on the stakes of a duel. Had Rangi had Ray had Rangi been in had Rangi been this scared, elevating herself to fight? Facing Nagaka had been less nerve-wracking than this. The battle on the ice had happened too fast for her to think each step through. You weren't as afraid back then because Jianzu was there, on your side. The thought held too much truth for her to swallow. She drew her weapons. Zhu grunted inside as he hugged one knee to his chest and then the other. For the last time, Kyoshi, he said, are you sure about this? You and your friendliness canoe straight to the bottom of the ocean. You should ask yourself that question, she said. I think your kind has a little too much certainty. An unnamed young Dao Fei, rather than mock or why, stood nervously in between them with his hand raised. Kyoshi spread her fans and settled into a 60-40 stance that Wong had taught her, equally good for striking or bending. Zhu pounced lightly on the balls of his feet, preferring not to signal his approach to earthbending. Yeah, Zhu bounced lightly on the balls of his feet, preferred not to signal his approach to earthbending. Every time I want to say airbending, but no. Yeah, Zhu pounced lightly on the balls of his feet, preferred not to signal his approach to earthbending. Ready! The referee shouted. Kyoshi licked the bottom of sweat off her lip. It tasted like grease. She scuffed a little more weight into her front foot. Zhu began to inhale through his nose. Begin! The young man shouted, before diving off the platform to safety. Kyoshi summoned her energy, starting with her connection to the ground and extending it through her weapons. She would overwhelm her apartment with a barrage of earth. But she was too slow. Then she was playing the wrong game entirely. Zhu thrust his arms forward, 2 fingers extending from each hand, and struck her fans with a bolt of lightning. And that is the end of the chapter. Oh no! Whoa! My dude. Oh my god. Oh. Bruh. Oh my god. That is intense. Whoa, what's gonna happen next? I actually have like no idea. He's a fucking firebender. Okay, well, that's the end of this recording. Thank you so much for listening. I will see you again later, probably. Thank you. Bye-bye.